Well, hello, I'm Heather Clancy, the editorial director of GreenBiz, and I am thrilled to be here today with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Thank you so much for the invitation to moderate this panel on sustainability. January 1st, 2020 was the beginning of the decade of action, a decade in which sustainability programs were meant to accelerate, to really drive down and get the carbon mitigation going. As we all know, 2020 has turned out to be not quite what we expected. There's converging crises of the COVID-19 pandemic, the racial injustice movement, so many different converging economic forces that are creating an entirely new atmosphere for the corporate sustainability profession. And yet, despite that, the movement is accelerating. Many thought that it would slow down, that it would be sidelined. It is not the case at all. Just one example, the number of net zero commitments by companies has nearly tripled, although there is really some debate as to what that means. But what I would like to say to start this panel off is that COVID-19 is turning out to be a teachable moment for the sustainability community. We see the potential impact of climate change. It is changing dialogues in the boardroom. It is absolutely being driven also by two very key stakeholders. Investors are demanding more transparency about climate-related risks and opportunities, and consumers are driving towards sustainably marketed products. 55% of the growth, for example, between 2015 and 2019 came from products that were labeled as somehow sustainable. With that in mind, our next panel is going to talk about how to prioritize and why we're seeing an acceleration. We have two very different companies represented here today, and I'd like to introduce the representatives now. Tim Brooks is Vice President of Environmental Sustainability with Lego Group. Tim, give everyone a wave. And he helped Lego reach a goal of 100% renewable in 2017, 3 years ahead of schedule. He also leads the Sustainable Materials Center. It's a research and development group at Lego dedicated to finding and implementing better materials for the toys and packaging, and with a 2030 goal in mind. And also, I didn't know this, and maybe you'll mention it later, you helped the company begin to use the plant-based plastics that we see in Lego bricks, made from sugarcane. Now, Todd Brady is Director of Global Public Affairs and Sustainability with Intel, and I'm hoping you see who he is. He is a chemical engineer by training. He leads state, local government affairs, media and community relations, volunteerism, and sustainability at all of the major manufacturing facilities and office locations around the world for Intel. And you're a 20-year veteran of the company. I didn't know that, but you've been around for a while and seen a lot of changes and had your hands in everything from the energy and water conservation programs to the green design programs and the Internet of Things and how technology is really used to drive some of these goals. Thank you so much to the two of you for joining this panel today. So I'd like to start with just talking about prioritization, right? Because there's so many different things. And I think it's one of the things that companies struggle with, where do you focus? We know that we need to drive down emissions reductions much more quickly than we have in the past. Why do we see your two companies doubling down? I'd like to start with you, Todd. You've been specifically engaged in lots of different pillars, as I mentioned before, energy efficiency, renewables procurement. You've driven quite a few accomplishments to date. What are the different pillars of your climate efforts, and where are you really prioritizing the action right now?
Yeah, thanks, Heather, and great to talk to you. Good to be here virtually. I'll share, to answer that question, I'll share a quick story. This month was my 25th year here at Intel, and I was hired by an individual. His name was Terry McManus, and he was the first environmental engineer at Intel. He was hired by Gordon Moore, the author of Moore's Law. A story about Terry is he was nicknamed by Gordon, he and the environmental attorney. He was hired in the late 70s. And he was nicknamed by Gordon Moore. The two of them were nicknamed Doom and Gloom. And the reason was that Gordon said every time he saw them, all they brought him was bad news. about decisions the company had made in its early years that resulted in environmental cleanup and remediation and things that were very common in the late 60s and 70s. By the time I joined in the mid 90s, the company had a very different outlook on the environment and sustainability. And in fact, the year before I joined was when we first published our first external environmental health and safety report, where we set goals, including goals around reducing our carbon emissions, if you can believe that, back in the 90s. And so I think that's a journey that most companies go through or have gone through, from looking at sustainability as a threat, and we have to do certain things because there's regulations or we made mistakes or whatever that might be, to how can we turn this into a business opportunity. And so that's the same approach that we've taken at Intel. And as it relates to climate, just briefly, we now have an outlook on our carbon footprint that runs from our supply chain all the way through the products that we sell to our end customers. And this year, during the pandemic, we've launched a new set of goals through the year 2030 that address each of those areas and push us ahead. Everything from 100% renewable energy in our operations, to partnering with our supply chain on a number of different initiatives, to working with our customers and the broader ecosystem around a goal to ultimately have carbon neutral computing. So implementing not only the reductions that we need from our own carbon footprint, but how can we use our products as an IT industry to help the rest of the world reduce their carbon footprint.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the setup there. I appreciate it. Now, I've mentioned stakeholders before, and of course, Lego's primary stakeholders, or one of them at least, is children. So Tim, how have the environmental challenges affecting children influenced the approach that your company is taking on sustainability and climate commitments?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me along for this session. Of course, we're about children. We're a toy company, predominantly delivering toys to children, but also increasingly adults during lockdown, as well as super popular activity during lockdown. So we put kids right at the center, and I think we always have done. Our motto is inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. And I think we feel very, very strongly across the company that the actions we take today as a company impact children as they grow up, and the children of the future, the adults of the future, the policemen and women, the firefighters, the doctors, the nurses, the mums and dads are kids today. And so what kind of planet do we want for them? But also, how do we want to inspire them to take action, to follow some of the work that we're all starting on sustainability, probably to solve some of the challenges we've unfortunately as a society left them as well. So there's two parts to our journey. Is one, that we want to inspire kids, but the other part is that we also want to put them at the center and learn from them. And just as an example of that, every 3-4 years we do a materiality assessment. So we go out to all of our stakeholders, our customers, our government partners, and we say, what is it you want from us on sustainability? What should we be doing to meet your needs? And the company we had to support us on this, this time around, we said, we'd also like you to ask children what they want the Lego Group to do and what they want society to do. And the company said, well, that's really interesting. We've done lots of these materiality assessments before for lots of big corporates. Never have we been asked to talk to children. And we said, well, of course, that's what we're all about. And we got some amazing input, as you would expect, very, very passionate, the need for all of us to do more, to work harder, certainly things that inspire us. And I think the letters and the input that the kids and young people had, we read out at our leadership conference as the start of our new sustainability strategy. And like, guys, this is why we're here. This is what it's all about, and it's really helped us focus on our mission to make Lego a zero impact company.
Thank you. That's great. I didn't know all that. Thank you very much for that. And as we look at this decade ahead of us, I want to hear from each of you on this one, where do you feel is the biggest chance that you have to accelerate action, right? So one thing that I'm hearing a lot about is scope 3, right? The supply chain. and the customers, if you will. So where do we feel, I'll start with you, Todd, where do you see the most opportunity to accelerate?
Yeah, I think there's two areas that immediately come to mind for me. One would be the supply chain. How do we drive more partnerships? Because you tackle issues such as climate change. No one company can do that. No one government can do that. No one country can do that. And so, as corporates, what can we do? Well, we can work with our supply chain. We can get as many people involved around a common goal, common vision, and try to get there collectively. So I think that's one. The second one I think is policy. As I mentioned before, no one government, no one country is going to solve this issue. And so I think from a business perspective, having clear policies around where we're headed in individual countries as a world in general is also very powerful and very important for us as we do our planning and we do our forecasting and we do our investing, not just for today, but for the next decade. What are those policies going to be so that we can effectively plan? So supply chain and policy, I think, are two areas that we really need to accelerate to help us get there.
Just before we go to you, Tim, just a quick question on the latter, Todd. So what is Intel doing to affect that policy?
So we, like many other companies, are actively advocating for clear climate policy, including from the U.S. government. And so, and including encouraging the international agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, for all of us to be actively involved in and moving towards a common initiative.
Great, thank you. Tim, where do you see a chance for Lego to accelerate?
Yeah, and to follow on from Todd, I wouldn't argue with either of those two. I think, the technology by and large is known, certainly around climate. We have renewable energy. We would like some areas to be more efficient than they are today, and that's work in progress, and solar panels have improved their efficiency. But by and large, the technology is known. There's some work to do on energy storage still. But really, it's about reaching out into the supply chain. 90% of our emissions are in our supply chain. We run our own factories, but that only accounts for 10% of our footprint. Within our overall emissions, the biggest chunk is materials, and so that's where we've really heavily invested. The plastic that we buy and the cardboard that we buy for packaging, about 40% of our total 1.2 million tons a year is materials. So we set up our sustainable materials journey in 2015. So quite some time ago around plastic and finding new sources of plastic. You mentioned plants from plants. That was one of our first successes, making all of our trees and flowers and plants from sugarcane material. And of course, it's another source of carbon molecules in the plastic, and it's a bio-based source. But really what it's allowing us to do is to reduce that carbon footprint. We've got about a 20% reduction in carbon footprint of those materials from introducing bio-based sources. Similar from recycled materials, as we're trying to refine them and bring them in. They are difficult from a quality and safety point of view. But really supply chain and exactly as Todd said, policy and really focusing on harmonized policy. Climate change we all know is it doesn't respect boundaries. And we need policies that don't respect boundaries, that are as harmonized as possible around investment in renewable energy, support for that, and also around offsetting where it's relevant as well. And there is a place for offsetting. It shouldn't be the first point of call, but it is a relevant part of the journey.
Now, you've both pointed to policy. I'm curious what other mechanisms really need to be in place, right? So let's go to renewable energy, for example. What barriers do you see, and how are you seeking to overcome them? Todd, let's go to you first on this.
Sure. Yeah. That's a great example. We ended the year last year at 100% renewable energy in the U.S. and Europe, but only about 70% globally. And the reason for that is that there are simply we don't have the same opportunities in some of the countries where we operate. The mechanisms, the policy mechanisms aren't in place yet to enable broad purchase of renewable energy. As Tim said, in many cases, the technology is there. We know how to build a solar farm. We know how to build wind farms and whatnot. And now we need the subsequent policy established such that companies can tap into that and can begin purchasing. And so we are actively engaging with utilities, with governments, and in many countries that's one and the same around the world to expand that. This year, we have a goal as a company to hit 75, so to increase our renewable energy purchases up to 75% of our total energy or electricity use around the globe. We have been working we have operations in the country of Israel, and so we will achieve 100% in Israel this year through work that we've been doing there with the government and utilities. And we're also taking steps in several countries in Asia as well to do that similar work.
Yeah, I'd love, Tim, I'd love your thoughts on this, but with a slightly different topic. Can you talk about like waste management and recycling? I mean, because that's clearly, as a consumer company, that could be one of the things that you're dealing with the most in terms of a mechanism that could be in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can come at it from both angles. I mean, certainly waste in our own production. We have a really high recycling rate in our own production, roughly about 92% of our waste we're recycling. But again, we have factories across the globe working out where that goes for recycling, how it happens, what restrictions are placed is very important. I think on the consumer side is where we focus a lot. We try and, our products last a long time. They're highly compatible since 1958. They all fit together. So we don't have a waste issue, particularly with the products, but certainly with packaging, and what we're looking for always is harmonized guidance on packaging. So, the move away from plastic packaging, we believe is the right thing to do, but into what? And, paper packaging for sure is the right way to go, but how much recycled content, where should it come from? What sort of standards are people looking for? And also the recycling label. I think that's one of our big challenges. We want to put a label on the box that helps consumers recycle the box in the right way, tells them what to do and where to place it. There's a great label in the US, the How to Recycle label, which we use in partnership with all of our retailers. But we struggle across the rest of the world through language barriers and all kinds of things to find a single harmonized label. And we make generally a one product for the entire world. So it's really important that we try and find, and we work with policymakers to try and find a harmonized way of doing that. Great.
When we talk about supply chain, that by virtue of the discussion means collaborating, right? These are your partners. It means negotiating with an organization to get them to do things. So I'm curious what the role of sort of pre-competitive collaboration across an industry or a supply chain, how important that is in this movement to accelerate. I'll throw that out to both of you.
Todd, go ahead. I was going to say I'll let Tim go first. I've been doing all the talking, so Tim, go for it.
Yeah.
I'll follow.
No, I think of course. I mean, joining forces is one of our sort of key themes on our sustainability mission. Joining forces with children, with parents, and also with other companies. We're not a huge purchaser of raw materials out there in the market. About 90,000, 100,000 tons of plastic a year. But what we are is a very visible brand. So we are able to partner with people using our brand to partner with companies, our material suppliers from big material supply companies right down to the small level, and also reaching out to other brands, leading consumer goods brands, trying to sort of crack this challenge on sustainable materials, particularly. That's sort of our biggest headache. When we said the technology is known on energy, on materials, it's less well known, and certainly not at the precision. We're down at sort of 2 microns molding tolerance, less than the thickness of a human hair. You need these bricks that fit together and also come apart with a child can take them apart. So it's really tight tolerance, and finding sustainable materials to do that, partnering with industry is super important. So we look out there in the car industry, they're using a lot of hard plastics. As you'd know, if you've stepped on a Lego brick, we're generally in the harder end of the material spectrum. We look to the car industry for hard plastics. We look at some, big furniture manufacturers, anywhere where We're sharing, the IT industry, where we're, for casings, where we're sharing that kind of technology. And also, we've always been open that we want to partner with toy industry as well and figure out some of these challenges. And then, some of our areas where we're using softer materials, we're partnering with apparel industries as well. So partnering with big and small companies, feeling the energy and trying to crack some of these solutions together in that pre-competitive space. And I think there's some great examples out there. Starbucks and McDonald's partnering on sustainable cups, in a competitive environment in the coffee industry, but really saying we have a problem that we need to solve and joining forces to do that.
So we're going to return to collaboration at the end with you, Todd. But first, before we go to a couple of audience questions, I wanted to do a little rapid fire with the two of you. Todd, how much do climate considerations inform the broader strategic decisions at Intel?
Yeah, they're very much intertwined. As I mentioned, we just launched our 2030 goals. We call it our RISE framework: responsible, inclusive, sustainable, and engaged. That was an exercise that was iterative with our CEO, with our executives, and it encompasses everything from our supply chain work to our operations to our product design and work with our customers. And in fact, we have tied a portion of all of our employees' compensation, our annual performance bonus, to various sustainability indicators for, I think, the past 8 years or so. This year, we have indicators around our water conservation and renewable energy that ultimately at the end of the year, if we achieve those or not, will impact all 110,000 of our employees' compensation. Yeah. So linking those two, I think really helps.
Well, and that was one of the audience questions, by the way. So I actually want to ask Tim: does Lego also compensate employees for sustainability actions?
Yeah, we have a range of measures, and similar to Todd, where we look at where we can drive the most impact. So down in our operations and facilities, of course, they're more leveraged around the carbon and energy than they would be in the design area. But yeah, that's how you can, one of the powerful levers where you can make change. But I think one of the things we're starting to look at is bringing in an internal cost of carbon as well to help better deploy our investment around carbon abatement. Across the globe, where you have different carbon intensities of electricity grid, it matters that you focus on a country that has a carbon intensity twice of another country. You can save twice as much carbon per solar panel, if you like. So we're using a lot of different mechanisms.
And for both of you, how important are your climate policies for improving near-term resilience, right, against climate change? So everyone sort of talks about this stuff as long time out. What about the impact it could have positively in the near term? Both of you, a couple thoughts. Todd.
Yeah, well, one linkage is the whole energy-water nexus and how those come together. And so as we looked at our long-term climate strategy, we said, we need to address water as well. And so we launched an initiative a few years ago to not only focus on conserving water in our own operations, but restoring water back to the communities where we operate. And we've launched a number of different initiatives. I was just on the phone last night with India, where we're located in the Bangalore area. It was a city of hundreds and hundreds of lakes that today is down to a handful of lakes because of overuse and mismanagement and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And we've been working to restore those lakes in those locations, which then restores water to the aquifers. In fact, we just completed the one project this year and have another one going. So those can have immediate impacts and yet also help address the longer term challenges we know we're going to be facing with climate change.
Great. Tim?
Yeah, I think that through our parent company, the direct investments we've made, we've invested just under $1 billion in renewable energy assets. So offshore wind parks, we have 2 of those, as well as, putting solar panels on factories. So we have 11 megawatts in construction and 22 megawatts in the pipeline. And, our goal is to put solar panels on every single factory and, cover the roof. There is a limit to what we can do because you can only cover, the roof is only so large. So We're also trying to find other mechanisms to stimulate renewable energy generation around our factories and around our sites, because typically covering the roof would only generate about 10 or 20% of the energy we need in that factory. So that's having a real-term effect in trying to stimulate energy infrastructure investment and really, greening the grid as well. And of course, we build it into all of our facilities as well. Plant green roofs with plants on them, or solar panels and insulation. And, we're doing a lot in our construction as well for the near term.
So we have one more audience question. Succinct answers, please, because we're running short on time. How important is it to set shorter term goals, like 2025, 20, in order to spur climate action, as opposed to just the longer ones? We've been talking about 2030, but most people talk about 2050. How important are those shorter term goals? A couple thoughts from each of you. Todd.
Yeah, it's critical. So with our 2030 goals, we have annual milestones as well. So you have to do that. Otherwise, 2030 is 10 years from now. We'll worry about it in 2028. Mm-hmm. So Tim? having regular check-in is critical.
Tim?
Yeah, I think it's both hands. So you set a big goal. So we want 50% or 10% energy improvement in 4 years. And then you set those intermediate goals. I think you need the vision, the big, bold vision at the end. And then you need to chunk it up and say, I expect 2.5% every single year.
Yeah. Got a minute left for each of your final answers. I want to start with you, Todd. Mentioned before collaboration, right? And one of your goals is a collaborative goal across an industry. So why was that important for you to do, and how are you going to get there?
Yeah, you're exactly right. We have several collaborative initiatives that we're kicking off. One that I referred to is carbon neutral computing. The reason that's important is because at the end of the day, with climate change, again, one single company is not going to be able to solve this. And ultimately, we need to get to a future where computing, which is proliferating everywhere, needs to be carbon neutral. If the world needs to get to carbon neutral, we do as well. We need to do that as an industry. And so kicking off that initiative is critical to the success.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Tim, what makes you optimistic that you're going to reach your goal?
Yeah, of course, it's going to be children, and I think the letters that I get, and I try and write back to every kid who writes to me, and the energy and passion. And I recently did a children's climate summit, and the challenges they laid out for companies and governments were not the sort of the standard things you would expect, which are, we must address the climate or take plastic out of the ocean. And of course, all of those things are super important. They were really specific. They were talking about protecting carbon sinks in peatlands and better agriculture infrastructure. And these are kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. The knowledge they have, the passion they have, and the voice that adults are now listening to, that makes me hopeful for the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great note to leave this on. We have not enough time to and answer another question, but let's do it for our children. We need to accelerate. We need to take action now. Get working. Thank you so much to you both for being here for us today, and going to turn it back to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.